We've got a full house for you this morning. Shane Hannon is here. Shane.
Good morning.
Kathleen McNamee is here. Kathleen, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much.
We're all about the mergers today. We're talking about LIV Golf and the PGA Tour. I mean, who didn't see this coming? What? How could we not have suspected that the money would convince the money-grabbingest sport in the world to grab the money? I mean, more fool us for not really predicting that ultimately the PGA Tour is getting what it wants, which is loads of money. And all the golfers are going to get more money. What first convinced you to fall in love with these Saudi billionaires?
I do wonder.
I didn't see it coming though, I have to say.
I thought it was coming. I just didn't think it was coming quite so soon. I thought it would be a bit more of a protracted process, but it seems like Jay Monahan just kind of took the reins and decided, no, not doing this anymore, lads.
He's a man of action, Jay Monahan. A titan of capitalism.
I know I told you all before that I wasn't going to do this, but guess what? Got 3 of my buddies in a room. Amanda Stavely,
it sounds
the
like
PIF.
they played a bit of golf in London and they had some nice meals in Venice.
Sure they did.
According to details in the Financial Times. I can only imagine the quality of the meals that they're having.
Oh,
food
I haven't even heard of. Can't pronounce.
22 courses.
Yeah, 100%. And you have to
ortolans
use
on a stick.
certain forks like in Titanic at that time in the movie.
But maybe not all that satisfying as well. Sometimes I find those fancier meals, they're just a bit like...
You can't have a burger afterwards.
That is true. That is true.
Chips on the way home. It's disgusting and it's disgraceful and it's humiliating for the players that decided not to take the carrot.
Is it?
It is, of course it is.
Why?
Because they are left now with a gaping...
They're left now with their own moral authority, no?
No, that's true, but it's still...
I hear everybody telling me, oh, he's been humiliated. Oh, Rory, he's been humiliated. Like, Rory stood up for what he believed in and I think still has his credibility.
He does.
Is that not better?
There's a reason there was anger in that room yesterday at that meeting at the Canadian Open.
But there is also the side as well that like he's come out and said like I've been given reassurances that this isn't going to happen, and like that is when you've been the public facing at the time when everyone else in the PGA didn't want to like stand up and be the public face of this. He did, and he was like, I've been reassured that it's all fine. I totally agree it's not humiliating what he did because he has his credibility and he has every moral authority in this situation, but I could understand how you'd be standing there being like, this is a bit embarrassing and annoying.
You know the Tucker Carlson figure in Succession who is like in every episode whenever they want to make him look like Tucker Carlson, and he's like, oh, I'm going to leak all this stuff and I'm going to embarrass you, and Shiv is like, we don't get embarrassed. Like, Rory McIlroy should not be embarrassed by doing the right thing here. A lot of people are going to say ha ha ha, but like the people who are pointing fingers at Rory, I'm sure he feels let down. I'm sure he feels betrayed. I'm sure he feels like somebody just broke up an engagement with him by text message. Now he understands how other people might feel in other circumstances. But he did the right thing. He stood up for what he believed in.
He did.
But he was surrounded by golfers. That was his original sin here, is being surrounded by golfers and the people in golf who are just interested in making as much money as they possibly can.
Yeah, it's the whole language around this that just gets me. Like when you listen to Jay Monahan talking about the 9/11 links, 15 of the 19 hijackers being Saudi and all the rest, and then he turns around and says things like he said yesterday. Like, the statement was just remarkable. And I understand that LIV were struggling for sponsors and they couldn't get on American television, but the PGA deciding to do this merger is just complete greed and money. Like, there's nothing else involved here. It's as black and white.
No, it's to grow the game, Shane. They're going to grow the game. The game will be bigger because of this, Shane.
I applaud PIF Governor Yasser Al-Rumayyan for his vision and collaborative and forward-thinking approach. This is Jay Monahan yesterday.
Well, you do have to take your hats off to whoever in Saudi Arabia decided 10 years ago we're going to take over the world sport, and then they just did it. They were like, okay. I mean, their plan is working.
It's an incredible show of power. Like, when you think of the sort of bodies and the money that's going around that they're taking, like, was it $2 billion they've spent on the LIV tour just to get players to come over, and now they're just all going back.
And what happens to the money? Like, there must have been some.
Like, do the players still get this money? Like, was it you get like a 200 million lump sum?
I'm dying to know that.
I am dying. Yeah, paid out over time.
Exactly. You'd think it would be like, we're going to give you 500 million, but it's going to be 50 million every year for 10 years. So you suspect that there's a break clause in the contract that if they rejoin the PGA Tour, you'll get a certain amount of that, but it'll be a lesser amount. Or maybe those contracts are just they all get rolled in, and all the golfers who went. And that's why they are laughing at McIlroy. I still think McIlroy did the right thing.
No, he definitely did the right thing.
Like, I don't think there's like any argument about that from this side of the room, anyways.
How do these LIV players get reintegrated now? These are players that we were told they would never play on the PGA Tour again, and now all of a sudden it's like, well,
when you look at how brazen they all were yesterday, whenever the news broke, I don't think they're going to have any problems reintegrating themselves. In fact, I fully expect them to be walking around various different courses, laughing at everyone.
Jesus,
just being like that. Thought you weren't going to see me again.
Donald Trump on his whatever social media platform he uses in his capital letters now. Great news from LIV Golf. A big, beautiful and glamorous deal for the wonderful world of golf. Congrats to all. So of course he has been critical of the PGA Tour in recent years. Had his championship taken away from him, wasn't in 2022 in New Jersey?
Yeah, well, he'll get that back now.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, it's Turnberry he owns. They'll probably get the Open in the next few years now as well. Yeah,
maybe Doonbeg is going to get one of those events.
And it's a lack of communication as well. Like Mackenzie Hughes tweeting yesterday, we found out through Twitter, this is a joke.
Well, you can't be telling everybody about a deal that's going on if it's like you can't blab. In fairness, I would say that's a strength of the organisation, their ability to get the stuff done. Like,
is it a strength, or is it the fact that it was like Monaghan and like 2 or 3 other PGA people? Like, when you keep it that close,
could you tell them an hour or two before? Like, finding out on Twitter isn't great.
What difference does it make?
It affects their jobs and livelihoods.
Yeah, they're going to get more money, and they'll all be like, they are going to get more money. Like, I don't know. You can't tell everybody everything. I don't think you can bring like a 200 tour golfers and their entourages and their agents and their managers.
But I do think, you can't bring everyone in on something, but I do think there's a level of respect that you owe players, that they at least get a heads up before the general public. I don't think that's too much for someone to expect in that situation. If it's a random email that drops and it's an absolute bombshell and you're like, oh my God, that's one thing. But if you're finding out and you're seeing it just like rolling through Sky Sports or CNN or whatever news you're watching, I don't think that's fair. I think that shows complete disrespect to the players, even more so than they were already showing.
Sorry, to say that the sports washing does not work, is anyone out there the argument now that the sports washing doesn't work? Like,
I don't think anybody's making that a case, though, are they?
But the fact that things in Saudi Arabia have actually got worse in the last year or two since all this kicked off, since LIV kicked off, they're still chopping people's heads off with swords. Like, if anything, things have got worse in Saudi Arabia since all this started.
There's an interesting comment in here on the YouTube from Cian Rowe, who's listening from Dubai. And he says, over this side of the world, there's a palpable feeling they're ramping up their efforts in becoming a superpower. Their wealth is scary.
It's just terrifying. Like, the figures involved here. Like, and we don't actually know the figures involved, but we just know that they're
3 billion is the figure quoted in the FT today. But again, like, we do need the 60,000 word. This is what I pay my €2 a month to the Athletic for. Finally, for them. I don't know if they've got anybody in the background who can deliver the inside story of exactly how the deal was done. Don't worry, there's going to be a lot of people wanting to take credit for this deal, who will be letting details leach out in the coming days. Big Phil won't be able to shut his mouth.
He's delighted. Like Rory McIlroy, obviously, will I think he's due to speak later on today. Padraig Harrington had a few interesting comments on Twitter yesterday. So first of all, he was saying, surprised that this merger has happened so quickly, but not surprised it's happened. Definitely in the financial interest of both sides, definitely in the financial interest of the players, even though some of those who gain will feel like they're losing. Good for the cohesion of global golf. And then the reaction started pouring into what Harrington was saying, and he went slightly further. People will have seen this perhaps this morning, but looking at some of the replies, he said, I'm trying to explain why this has happened. It's hard to overcome the financial business side of life when you're representing a group with many different backgrounds and morals. My own country, he said, sells military technology to Saudi Arabia. So many other compromises. Yes, this is sports washing, and yes, unfortunately it proves sports washing works, but maybe one positive: inclusion and trade is shown to improve and change countries involved for the better. My own country, speaking about Ireland, thought it was acceptable to lock up unmarried mothers as late as 1996, which I thought was a strange comparison. I mean, when you're comparing one bad country to one other country's bad moves at a certain time, I think you're onto a loser.
Are you? Why?
Well, like, yeah.
Did it not happen?
Well,
is it not true?
Of course, we talk about the mother and baby homes all the time in this country, and rightly we should.
But we don't talk about it. We roll it into a ball and push it deep inside
Catholic
us.
guilt, yes, of course.
And nothing. It'll never resurface again. And we betray them by not giving them enough. We have not made reparation for the evil that we did as a society. And he's just going like, look, this is a complicated situation. I thought it was interesting that he brought it up, and I think it shows a level of reflection which I wasn't sure was there.
Well, it's probably something that people had.
And he points out that it is sports washing.
And he did also say that he didn't negotiate.
I think that, like, I thought
it was kind of interesting because it was probably the most detailed response I saw by anyone in the golf world who is actually still
a Ryder Cup captain, like, still competitive on the seniors tour. You know, like,
you could almost see the like rise and dips in his own, where he was like, I can see this side of it. I can also see that side. It was almost like he was speaking as he was thinking through it.
I saw loads of people criticising him and similarly like, oh, you can't bring up it's whataboutery. It's like, okay, yeah, but all of life is whataboutery. Like, they're like describing something as whataboutery does not suddenly mean that you can't have a conversation about. Obviously, there are massive differences in the global strength that Ireland has versus Saudi Arabia, and obviously every situation is unique. But
I think the criticism is coming because it's tough to compare horrible things. Like, you can't power rank horrific things that happen. You know, and I think that's what the sense that people were getting.
American foreign policy has resulted essentially in the situation that we have in the Middle East at the moment. 1 million people were killed in Iraq on the most flimsy pretenses ever. 1 million people died in the war in Iraq, and as a result of that, we have the incredible instability that we have. Iraq has not recovered and is unlikely to recover for multi-generations, and you know, like, the whole notion that somehow America is this bastion of we should do business with them. Like, British security forces operated under a shoot to kill policy on our island. Mm-hmm. We don't care about that when it comes to doing business with UK companies. So, like, this isn't they're our current bogeyman, but actually, you know, in 10 years' time we'll decide they're not the bogeyman and we'll move on to something else. Like, I do feel like there's a subtlety and a nuance to what Harrington is saying on Twitter about golf, which is maybe difficult to I don't feel like I can criticise Porrick Harrington this morning because he's making points about, like, look, this is a really complicated situation. The deal was always going to happen because everybody wanted more money, and the more money is coming. Personally, I turned down the money. I'm like, good man, Porrick. That's my takeaway from this. And I think that you can absolutely hold a mirror up to ourselves and go, well, how great are we? How great are we? Like, with this misogynistic society which we've had, which we presided over, which we wrestled back, and then we handed straight over to the church in Fianna Fáil for like 80 years, and we're slowly chiseling it away. Like, that's what I think, you know?
I know. No,
we're great lads here, aren't we?
No,
we're not great lads.
Like, and sorry, I should say I'm not criticising Porrick Harrington. I actually, like, his comments are thought provoking. It's just that, yeah, where does the line stop? You can't talk about, like, British government colluded to blow up my hometown of Monaghan in 1974. Do you know? Like, but where does this stop? Like, where do you then start talking about the Open and Irish participation? Like, there's such a grey area, and that's the scary thing about this as well, that the line between sport and current affairs and news and politics has narrowed to the point now where it's completely impossible to tell them apart. Like, sports washing has worked, and it feels like on this show and on Off the Ball in the evenings as well for the last 3 or 4 years we've been talking about politics nearly more than sport.
You don't think the college football game coming to Ireland is sports washing, do you? Or is it?
Like, it's not, but, like, is it? Yeah, that's the question. Like, and I don't think anyone thinks that, like, America are the world police and are the bastions of all that is good.
Is the whole thing about sports washing, though, and not, like, when you're trying to make the definition, the difference between, like, a state deciding that they're going to, like, buy up some of the most popular sports and most popular sporting teams to, like, make themselves seem more palatable on a global scale, different to the acts of, like, individuals within sport?
I would say, yeah, and
like, that would be, for me, that would be the difference between, like, college teams coming over here.
I think that
sorry, just to finish, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that like it's been an absolute failure of like Western media, Western policies over the last couple of years that we don't look at the America in the same way that we view, like you look at what's happened to people who are fleeing like various different crises across South America, which are all propped up by American governments, like all that sort of stuff. I do think that everything that's going on with abortion, everything that's going on with rights for women, for LGBT people, like it's insane what's going on, and I think we should be having more conversations about that, and we should be having more conversations about like American companies investing in things. But also again, it's individuals and it's companies, and to me that's different to like a state investment in and a targeted attempt to make yourself seem better on a global scale.
I agree with you, but I also think, and Jerry, your point as well about holding the mirror up, like Qatar World Cup, we talked about it on air from a footballing perspective. We engaged perhaps in sports washing, as did every other news and sports organisation in this country and in many other countries. Like, should we have done that? Like, I can't answer that question. You know, but Qatar is a state that have horrific human rights themselves and rights for women, and yet we engaged in talking about the sport. So I don't know where this ends, like, and I don't know what the right answer is. And that's the point, and that's probably why you're right about Padraig Harrington's bringing this up, that there is no right answer or wrong answer. Clearly what's happening in Saudi Arabia is wrong, but I do understand your point that Padraig Harrington is probably holding up a mirror and just saying, well, look, none of us are perfect.
I think the point about the individual versus the state is well made. I would suggest, though, that like the sports washing started with the Olympics and, you know, obviously famously the Nazis in Berlin, and then America versus the USSR in their proxy on the Olympic fields, where athletes were doped on both sides and blind eyes were turned, and all that anybody wanted was the medal race. But I think that maybe the I know we're getting deep in the weeds here, but you know, the system of American capitalism is the American identity, and so I think it's not a massive leap to say that like a company investment or the buying by rich Americans, the plutocrats who control the society essentially and who decide who is fit to stand and who's going to get enough money to be able to run an election campaign, like that's just the way they wield their power. The way the Saudi Arabians are wielding their power is they're taking money from the ground in the form of oil, and they're hoarding the oil, controlling the value of it, and then making loads of money and then buying assets with it, and the world, it has to decide whether or not it's going to stay fascinated with and wedded to the oil that's coming from the ground, because that's giving the power to the people who are buying the football clubs and buying the golf tours and whatever comes next. Like, you know, you've got to assume that the entertainment industry, the drinks industry, the travel industry, like, you know, well,
it's basically every industry going, apart from anything that's based on something green. But the other thing as well, and I think sometimes with especially American clubs and teams, because there's maybe been a bit more of a backlash to it, especially in recent years, is that it's almost easier on an individual level to get angry about like what a certain team or a certain club stands for, or issues with, say, who their owners support, whether it's politically or what like religious or political ideals they support, whereas it's harder to go up against an entire state in that way as well, if they have control over a team or if they have control over an entire league. I mean, you look at, say, the NFL and the difficulties there's even been there with some of the political stances and with the people that they're funding on a scale, like, but it still seems slightly easier than going up against an entire state. I know the point you're making, and I do agree that it's not a massive leap, but in my head there is still an individuality to those two things, and maybe that's a case of needing, because like sports washing is not a term that's been in our vocabulary for all that long, even though it probably should have been. It's like one of those many terms that we now have to describe phenomena that we think are new but actually aren't at all. So like maybe it is just a case of widening that definition, but for me, in my head at the moment, it still is a little different.
Fair enough. I would say they're on a spectrum. And like, again, if we had an hour, we could get into a bit more detail.